Just waiting for the red light. Good evening, everybody. And if you're just tuning in, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. You're listening to the Angel Rock on UPRN Radio. If you'd like to watch a show, please come on over. You can see us on Facebook. It's streaming to my profile. It's streaming to many of Joe Montaldo, the owner of UPRN, his pages, the UPRN page. You can just look that up on Facebook. Or better yet, come on over to YouTube. You can see us on UFO Paranormal Radio. That's a YouTube channel, so we'd love to have you. I should introduce myself. If you've never been here before, welcome. My name's Lorilei Potvin. I'm a Canadian psychic medium, a crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher, and mentor, and I'm also a registered nurse. And if you've never been to my show before, welcome, and also welcome to everybody returning that's been here before. I always say my show covers all aspects of the supernatural, anything from UFOs to aliens. Sometimes you get right into the paranormal, the creepy, the strange, the weird. We also get into things like spirituality and the power of the mind and power of positivity. And tonight, my guest is no stranger. I am so glad she could join me because this is the show before Halloween. She's been here many times. My partner Del and I of the Delicious Recipe have had her on, and she was free. I was so glad. It's Varla Ventura. But before, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. If you've never heard of her, you need to get her books. She's an author. She is a fountain of knowledge. She's written books on mermaids, on fairies, werewolves, vampires, the strange, the unusual, the paranormal, and honestly, you're going to love her. If you haven't met her before, you're going to love her. Welcome, Varla.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. I'm so happy that you're here too.
Happy spooky season.
Yes, I'm sorry I got distracted for a second. I see these messages. It's like everybody knows my show.
That's actually what I was doing is I was trying to put my computer on, turn the little moon on so I get no notifications. Because it's distracting when something pops up in the corner.
Well, it is. And like I said, this person, I've told them my show is Monday night and they message. But I do want to give a shout out to the chat room here. We've got Zachman, one of our regulars. Zachman, welcome. And Shady D, another one of our regulars, welcome. So we are into the spooky season, and I have lots of friends that practice Wicca or are witches. I'm not. I just know with your knowledge base, I finally learned how to pronounce this properly. Samhain. Where does that come from?
It's actually Gaelic. Mm-hmm. It's the Gaelic word, the Irish word for what is the root word of Halloween. So if you think of it that way, I know when you see it written,
looks like Samhain.
Samhain, and I think that's become pretty common in more popular culture. People do say it that way, but the correct pronunciation is Samhain. And if you think about it, if you're trying to remember how to say it, it's just like Samhain. There's a little bit of that like Halloween in there.
Oh,
so that's how I always remember. Yeah, that's how I always remember how to say it, because it's Gaelic is one of those languages that does not sound the way it is written.
Like the name
until you memorize. Until you memorize what the letters mean. So
Dave Petrella says hi, Lorilei. Hi, Varla. He's going to be my guest next week.
So great!
Saying, hello.
Oh, nice. How nice.
No, well, the name Saoirse, I remember when I first saw that name, it was like, oh my gosh, like, how do you say that name?
Yeah. Or Siobhan, that's another one.
Just read my mind. Yeah,
Siobhan, Siobhan, that's always a tricky one.
People get Sioban or whatever, right, with Siobhan.
Yeah. There's a hilarious, this is completely kind of sidebar, but there's a hilarious YouTube video of this Irish woman, and she says she puts the name up on the bottom, and it's like, okay, how do you pronounce this? And you say it to yourself, and then she says it correctly. And then there was like another one recently. I don't think it was the same woman, and she was just laughing because the Siri was pronouncing the names and was saying them so wrong, and she was just laughing and like tears just streaming because it was so so wrong. So yeah, so that's actually a pretty normal thing that people pronounce that as Samhain, but
Well,
we say Samhain.
I did a little bit of research on it, and isn't it supposed to be, no, you're going to correct me, I know you will, because like I said, guys, her knowledge base is so incredible. Isn't it a period between the harvests? Isn't it something like I was reading like that?
Yeah, so Samhain is kind of like you have the sort of end of summer
Right,
harvest, Lunasa, which is at sort of the beginning of August. In the
right.
if you're looking at the Celtic year, which a lot of witches follow that Celtic
Mm-hmm.
year, the traditional Celtic calendar, and then actually Samhain is sort of it's both a harvest and it's a celebration, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also kind of marks in many traditions it's the witch's new year. It actually marks that passage into winter and into darkness, because as
Yeah.
we know it just keeps getting darker and darker
Mm-hmm.
and darker. So we light a huge bonfire and we kind of burn against the night and try and call in all of our ancestors and just like call in all your shots and get all the help you can, because you're about to go into the darkest,
Mm-hmm.
scarcest time of the year traditionally, right? In like a
Mm-hmm.
culture that relies strictly on crops and hunting,
Mm-hmm.
that was really critical.
Right.
And that's one aspect of it, of course. Yeah. So there's the harvest aspect. We also have the idea of, as we're entering into that darker period,
Mm-hmm.
that it is a time when we say the veil is thinner.
You're
So
reading my mind tonight, Varla. Everything you're
oh,
saying,
we're
like that
so
was literally
on.
in my mind. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, it's great,
We do
great.
this every time we do a show. You always say
I know,
just
it's
what
so
I'm about
fun.
to say.
It's so fun. Well, and don't let me keep. I mean, stop me so
No, I
you
want
can
people to hear
ask the things
you.
you want too.
I want people to hear you.
Um, so yeah, uh, basically, if you're thinking of the veil being thinner, in other words, like going from this kind of bright and abundant time when people are sort of out and in the fields and kind of trying to like literally like reap the very last drops of any kind of
Mm-hmm.
crop. And now we're celebrating that, but we're also entering into this time when we sort of need to have that darkness on our side. That's how I always look at it.
Interesting.
So there's a time when the veil is thinner,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually a time that in the Celtic tradition, which is where now what we have today as modern Halloween has its roots in several different traditions, but more than any, the Celtic and the Irish traditions are
Mm-hmm.
where most of the practices evolve from. And
Mm-hmm.
so the idea that the veil's thinner is actually a time when Queen Morrigan, who is sort of like a warrior goddess
Mm-hmm.
and a goddess of war and death, and
Yes.
in the Celtic mythos, the other world, which is the world of the fairies, is
One of my
actually,
favorites.
yeah, it's actually also the world
Mm-hmm.
of the underworld and
Mm-hmm.
the ghosts. It's a place where a lot of like ghouls and strange creatures kind of live within that realm. And so she opens the gates. And now you might know her mostly by the raven or the crow that is perched on her shoulder.
Right.
That's She's a shapeshifter and she can transform, but she opens the gates, basically the
Mm-hmm.
floodgates, and lets all of these beasties fly about at night. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually, she's a witch's goddess, and so the witches were the ones that would be out there stoking the fires. And later, when Christianity tried to take over, the witches were dancing with demons. But prior to that, the witches were doing ancestral rites and doing things to ensure actually the health and prosperity of the people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was all part of that kind of pagan sacrificial element that you needed in order to make it into the kind of unknown. So
Mm-hmm.
that's that idea of dressing up for Halloween
Mm-hmm.
was something very traditional, because you would dress to be able to walk safely among the fae and the otherworldly
Okay.
creatures. And so that was also part of the ritual that has then evolved into children
Into this.
dressing up. Yeah, into that. Children dressing up so that they don't get taken by the fairies, so that they don't get taken by the other world, and so that they are actually kind of can pass through disguise. And also these creatures can pass among us and, check things out, whatever they need to do,
Mhm.
get their business done in the world of the mortals. Because the
Well,
rest of the time, oh no, please go ahead.
no, all I was
Yeah.
gonna say is I remember you talking about the fae that could take babies and leave
Oh
changelings.
yeah,
Like, is it
yeah,
more
yeah.
common then? Plus, the other thing is, I think there's got to be something to this with the veil being thinner because in Mexico they celebrate the Day of the Dead
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
ancestors have 24 hours basically, and they put their photos up and
Yes.
celebrate them and
Yes, and the tradition of creating a feast and an
mhm,
altar with the dead's favorite foods
mhm,
and their favorite liquor and their favorite cologne or whatever
mhm,
things that people loved in life,
mhm,
you lay that out in death as a means of making offerings.
mhm,
And that's something actually that's very easy for anyone to do, even if
mhm,
you're feeling like, oh, I don't want to dabble in, the dark arts.
mhm,
You can just
mhm,
actually get a photo or a picture of someone that
mhm,
has died that you care about. It's particularly powerful if they've died in the last year. That's
mhm.
part of many traditions believe that, but it can be someone that you just miss and you light a candle to them, leave a little dish of candy or something that they'd like, and really just kind of implore them to help you, whether that's just to protect you, protect your family, bring you a little health, bring you a little extra luck. And think about who you're calling on too, right? Because you could,
Yeah.
you might want
Mhm,
to call on that person who, was always prosperous in life or was a really
mhm.
good business person if you're trying to start a business. And I'm not a super advanced astrologer, but I
We
was
have
just.
one in the audience.
Oh, great. Okay, so
He left
there's.
you a question. He said November 1st, it's Dave Petrella. He said
Oh,
November 1st is right about the mid-fall season, right, Varla?
yeah. So it's kind of about halfway between um, fall and winter.
Mhm.
So just like the solstice kind of pops up in between, kind of halfway through winter. So
Yes.
the seasons
Mhm.
are kind of in these cycles, and there's 8 of them. There's 8
Mhm.
holidays really, but there's 4 kind of primary ones. And the opposite of this one, the opposite of Samhain, is Beltane,
Mhm.
which is in May. And
Mhm.
that's kind of that's also a time when the veil is very thin,
Mhm.
but it's more of a time of bringing in the light and, dancing with the fairies and opening up the gateway to, the summertime. So, yeah.
I got a question though.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if she opens the gate and lets all the beasties out, right? How do we get them back in? Or do they just keep multiplying in that realm and every year when she
Oh,
opens
no,
the gate they come back?
okay, so two things.
Mhm.
One, they don't want to stay here all the time because if they
Okay.
did, we would hunt them.
Okay.
We know, right? Like we that's you see people their reaction to strange things. They want to shoot it or capture it or stick it in a jar.
Mhm.
So they probably
Mhm.
wouldn't want to be among us all the time.
Mhm.
But the other thing is, there's argument that the fairies and the otherworldly creatures actually are among us whenever they want, that they're
Mhm.
kind of existing in, for lack of a better way of describing it, it's a parallel dimension,
Mhm.
right? It's one
Yep.
that's happening at and around
Yep.
where we are and we can't see it. And there's actually a beautiful legend that's kind of mermaidy,
Ooh, I love it.
that has to do with why we can't see the fairies.
Mhm.
And I actually did not know this story until more recently. And I thought,
Mhm.
oh, this is just like, this makes so much sense. But there's the son of the sea god. His name is Manon MacLear.
Oh,
And
wow.
he's actually whom the Isle of Man is named after.
Mhm.
And he has a few different really cool abilities. He's kind of
Okay.
a psychopomp, meaning that he can kind of help guide people into the other world. and he's also a kind of a got a cloak of invisibility, and he can kind of like
Harry Potter sounds like.
yeah. So his cloak of invisibility is actually something that, so the fairies in Ireland were actually, there was a couple times where they were in battle, and this is
Okay.
in like, getting deep into Celtic mythology, but there's a couple times where they're in battle, and one of the times, instead of leaving Ireland completely, Manon MacLear said, please just go underground and I will give you this mist. I will give you this cloak. I will give you this gift and you can have it. And whenever you want to walk among the people and be above ground, this will cloak you. And so people won't be able to see you, and then they can't harm you. And so he implored them not to leave Ireland. And so they actually use this cloak of invisibility, this magical mist,
Yeah.
to prohibit us from seeing them. And when I heard the story, it just made so much sense,
It does.
because
Yeah.
two questions I get asked the most about fairies are, besides are they real, but
Yeah.
why can't we see them, or why do we only see them sometimes? And like what's the, like, where do they go? And that just really kind of, because I always knew that they had the ability to sort of like disappear or reappear and only show themselves to certain people with the second sight, people who have passed into that other world and come back. And that's not to say that the afterlife is exactly the same as this other world. But going back to kind of opening those gates, it's sort of like, you release the hounds and then they come back to you.
Gotcha.
So they will do her bidding, right? So they will kind of like bring her out and bring them. She'll let them out, and they'll come back, because she's sort of the queen of witches, and they'll listen to her.
No, but that makes
Hopefully,
sense, right? Let them out
in
for
theory.
24 hours. Actually, I really like that Disney movie Coco, because
Oh
have you
yeah,
seen it?
that's a cute movie. Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah, yeah,
is, with the Day of the Dead, right? And
yeah.
celebrating your ancestors and
Oh
what have
yeah.
you. Because like there's so much legend and lore. Like I always find it funny when people say the veil is thinnest at 3 a.m. All the crazy stuff happens at 3 a.m. Well, it's 3 a.m. practically somewhere in the world at all times. It is. Well, it is. Like,
You
and
know what? Dell asked me that one time. He said,
yeah.
"How can it be? How if the witching hour is this for me and the witching hour is that for you? How can it
Hmm.
be at the same time?" And I said, "If we both left our house at the same time, we'd meet somewhere in the
In the
middle,
middle.
right?"
Hmm.
So it's basically my distance to the darkness, my distance to midnight
That
is
makes sense.
right. So
Hmm.
and so the because the sun is moving and the earth is turning, then
Hmm.
it isn't the same time. It's not
Hmm.
like 6 p.m.
Hmm.
Eastern time and 3 p.m. It's 6 p.m., right? It's just like
Hmm.
whatever your time zone
No,
is
but that
what you're.
makes sense, because I'm going to be honest with you, Dell. As you can tell when you've talked to Dell, he's got one of those minds. You have quite the conversations with him. And, I often wondered, like, there is no space and time on the other side. But when you hear people's reports of things happening, it's usually around 3 a.m. Like, I can tell you, thinking back, I've had the paranormal around me, as most of us have that are aware of it, since childhood. One summer, from the time the snow melted until it fell again, I woke up every night at 3 o'clock in the morning, 8 years old, unable to breathe.
Oh,
I was like being choked. Like I have no idea what happened with that. They diagnosed me with asthma for lack of, didn't know what it was. It didn't happen again. But yeah, like, and I wasn't choking on anything. Like, I literally could not bring any air in. It was like something was out choking me. I was
oh,
terrified to go to sleep. Hmm.
oh yeah, that's scary.
Hmm.
Just the other night, I was on Dave Scott's
Hmm.
Space Out Radio, and one of
Yeah.
his, it was actually, I think it's the guy who was the guest the next night. He said that for like the last 6 months, he's been waking up at 3:33 every
Interesting.
night for like
Mm.
months. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, most people do agree that the witching hour is actually
Mhm.
longer than 1 hour, and it's
Oh, it
anywhere.
is.
It usually starts around midnight and goes midnight to 3 or 4 a.m.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know for myself that I have done some of the most incredible productive writing if I can power through that sort of 10 to midnight slump.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
like that 10 to midnight slump. I'm good till 10, and then I kind of have a little need to have like a power nap or something,
Yeah,
and then I can make it through the night.
that's what I did. I've been doing that. That's what, like, I haven't been to bed. Like, I have not been to bed. I think what's today, Monday? I went to bed Saturday night. I think I slept, and then last night, same thing, just a power nap. But you know
Just power
why?
napping.
Well, no, I'm starting my resin business, but the problem is I'm so busy with everything else during the day. Most of the people, except my friends in Australia, are in bed. So it's quiet. That's when I can do meditation. That's when I can create. For
Mm-hmm.
you, it's writing. You can
Mm-hmm.
create, you can get that flow. And I
Yeah.
find when you work nights, especially, right? You're right. You just get through that little slump. And then once you're up past about 12:30, you're awake.
Yeah. It's easy, right? It's easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
so
Right.
what is
So
the
we
candy?
have the people, we have the witches moving among us. So we have that nice thin veil. We have the ancestors kind of looking after us. One of the other traditions, just in regards to Halloween, that we think of is trick or treating. And
I just said, I don't know if you heard me. If you played this back, you'd hear me say, "What about the candy?" And then you were starting again. So I just was really quiet.
oh yeah. So
Ah,
this is really cool. I kind of just learned this a couple years
mhm,
ago because I didn't know this, but um so the trick or treating actually has roots again in Ireland, and it was a
mhm,
time, of course, when people even into 1800s or
mhm.
so, you had people like long after Christianity had been implemented, and
Right.
a lot of the pagan traditions had sort of been integrated into that.
Mhm,
You still had people celebrating Samhain. You still
mhm.
had that bonfire.
Right.
Um, and so people would have these celebrations and they'd have, potlucks, and it would just be a good, sometimes you just got to throw a party, right? There's
Mhm,
nothing better for the community
mhm.
than having a nice party.
Yeah.
And so what people would do is that the children would actually go door to door to the wealthy houses,
Okay.
and they would ask for an offering to the community table. And so
Mhm.
that could be coins, it could be sweet breads, it
Nice.
could be food, it could be drink, it could be whatever was contributed. And
Mhm,
so they would go door to door, and it wasn't considered begging. It was actually the wealthy's responsibility to give more and to give something to the community so that
mhm.
everybody could partake in it. And
Plus, then the
so,
kids. Who's going to say no to a kid
right, I
versus
was going to
an
say no
adult,
to
right?
kids. So the kids would go around and they would gather these things. Now, they
Mhm,
weren't necessarily in costume
mhm,
during that time because they were kind of gathering things in advance. But
mhm.
that is the idea of going and asking door to door and getting your
Ah.
treats. That's kind
Mhm.
of where that comes from.
And they
For
used to carve turnips, I heard. I was reading, but when they
yes,
came over to
yes.
the New World, they found that pumpkins were much easier, so that's why the jack-o'-lanterns?
Yes, exactly. And well, because pumpkins are indigenous to North America,
Mhm,
and so there were turnips in abundance, and they would
mhm,
carve these little lantern heads, and they would be sort of guardians of against evil, and they'd be a way to sort of light the way back home from the bonfire.
mhm,
I also read that it was a tradition to take a coal from the
mhm,
bonfire at the end of the night and
mhm.
put it in that turnip and bring
Okay.
it back to your house
Oh, yeah, for your
and use
hearth.
it to light your hearth, and that would
Yeah.
bring you abundance and luck in the coming
You're
months or
right, and
year.
then I was
Yeah,
reading they were hideous faces they would carve
so
to
scary.
well, to keep the beasties, like, I guess, that escape for the night to
Yes.
kind of scare them away
Yes, to
with the
keep them
thought.
at bay.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And actually, there's a long-standing tradition of sort of evil eye things to ward off evil. Sometimes you'll
Mhm.
see even like an old, National Geographic or something like
Right.
that. There'll be this kind of like relic, and it just looks really terrifying.
Mhm.
But it was terrifying in order to ward off the
Mhm.
most frightening things. There's a castle that I visited in Ireland, however long ago that was, back when
Oh,
we were
wow.
traveling,
Yes.
and
We would have
they
visited each other by now. We're not that far
I know we're
away.
not that far away, and that is definitely happening.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, then we can just do the show live.
I know. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah,
I
that'd
would
be
love it.
great.
Mhm.
So I mean, I know it's live right now, but like live in
No,
the
in
same
the
room.
same place, geographic. We do have a question. I highlighted
Oh
it for
yeah.
you, but I want to hear what you
Okay.
have to say. So go ahead.
Oh, I don't. Oh, what were we even talking about? Were we talking about turnips and
Turnips and something
I
about
lost
the
my train.
hideous faces.
That's fine.
Well, let's
Yeah. Oh,
actually,
hideous faces.
Josh,
Oh, yeah. No, the evil
evil
eye.
eye.
So
Okay.
they showed me this part in the castle that had this really disturbing image worked into the stonework, and they
Hmm.
said that they would build that directly, same reason people would put gargoyles on churches. They
Right.
would build these things directly in, and they would do things that were so, the idea was to create something so abhorrent that even the evil things would turn away from it. And this one
Okay.
actually depicts like a woman having sex with an animal and another animal. It's very weird. Yeah.
Come and take a look at
Pretty
our beautiful
hideous.
artwork.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It's
Joshua
like, no, I
Murphy
don't think I
asked,
want that on a pendulum. Thank you.
no.
I'm good.
Joshua Murphy asked a really interesting question. What about meeting death? I have met death 3 times.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely the time to sort of the idea of going into the darkness and going into that stage of the underworld or the blackness is also an allegory for for going into death. And there
Hmm.
are many stories of heroes going into the world of the good people or into the other world or
Okay.
deep into caves in order to sort of reconcile with that death and with that kind of line between the living and the dead in order
Hmm.
to bring back some kind of benefit for their community, whether that was, protection in war or abundance or whatever it was. But it's definitely a time to I mean, there are traditions all around the world that not only celebrate or hold death as they perceive it in reverence, but
Right.
it is also a time when you are making contact with that other side. And so, yeah, I mean, for some people, they may see a death god or death itself.
Well, it's interesting. What I really like, I've actually, my back wasn't the way it was. Like I said, I'm a nurse, but I'm off permanently, and I've considered it's an awful name. It's called a death doula, but you basically
Yeah,
help people transition. You know this
yeah,
probably, but for our listeners, transition
yeah.
from life into death. It's a normal transition. Everybody will do it, and I
Yes,
believe we go
yes.
on forever and ever and ever, right? But the problem is, like, so many people fear death, yet you talk to people that I've studied near death experiences for 40 years. I believe I had one as a toddler. And every single person you talk to practically had, when they come back, it's not exactly the same story, but it's like they know their life purpose. They found out why they
Mm.
needed to return, and many times come back like a completely changed person. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and I've heard
I
um
do.
I, I've heard of a it was actually my brother-in-law when he was dying.
Hmm.
I was visiting him in the hospital, and he told me that there was a light that came down, and the light came down, and when he looked at it more closely,
Hmm.
he realized that it was like thousands of tiny little things. He didn't know what they
Mhm.
were. Angels, he thought.
Mhm.
Very, very small.
Yeah.
And he said he felt very, very at peace, but he just looked at them and said, "Not yet."
Mhm.
And he actually died, I think, 4 days
Oh, I'm
later,
so
maybe 2 days
sorry.
later. So, yeah, it was very tragic. He was very young. However, it gave me comfort, and I was able to comfort my sister by telling that I knew that that is probably what he saw again, and he was ready. And he told me that he was very, it was a very peaceful feeling.
I'm writing a
So,
book. I'm writing
oh,
a book about that actually, collecting stories mostly from nurses, but some first responders, because we're usually the one at the bedside besides family that
mhm.
help people make that transition. And you're right. A lot of people may think that their loved one is hallucinating or what, but you'll hear stories. I'll tell you a really cool story, actually.
Yeah,
It's very
please do.
tragic, but it's cool. One girl that's a friend of Dell's, his wife is a nurse, and her mom was a nurse. And we got talking at the cottage last summer, and she told me this story. She said her mom used to work on pediatrics as a nurse, and you guys too have a large Indigenous population like we do, or First Nations. And there was a little one there that was about 4 years old, and the family couldn't be there. I guess they lived way up north, and this little one was all by himself. Well, he ended up passing away,
Oh,
and the floor was so crazy busy. So of course, they covered him up and, you know, kind of closed the door. Well, there was nobody else in that room, and the call bell kept going off, and they kept coming in, and like, what is going on? I'm getting goosebumps telling you this. And then her mom, it hit her. She went, "Oh my God, I'm supposed to open the window. That's part of their tradition for the soul to leave." And when she
oh,
opened the window, the call bell stopped ringing.
oh, I
Mhm.
just got chills too. Oh,
Mhm. Mhm. So the other thing, if you think about this too, like you say, with it being the dark period, um, going into winter, there probably was a lot more death, right? Because of famine and disease if you didn't have a good harvest, or because of
yeah, or
cold,
just because
right?
it was cold. Yeah, it
Hmm.
was harder. It was just harder living. You could run out of things. It was definitely a time of scarcity.
Hmm.
So, yeah, absolutely.
It says, Shady D says, with Samhain traditions, is there a connection to outer worldly beings? That's a good question.
That's a good question. I
Mhm.
think that in traditional Celtic mythology, we're talking more about, if you wanted to see outer worldly, it would just be gods and goddesses.
Mhm.
Um, but as far as like an off-planet connection, I mean, of course, there's some people that believe that, that's how it all started, right?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
I don't know too much about outer worldly beings
Mhm.
or any traditions that specifically involve that around this time of year.
Mhm.
But I would say, just from personal experience, it's
Mhm.
more likely that that you can make connections during this time, just
Is a
because,
veil.
yeah, the
Mhm.
veil is thin. There's a lot of traffic, right? There's traffic between here and
Mhm.
the other world and the astral plane and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
It's just like things are swirling around, and so I think it is a time, especially if you're inclined to be able to
Contact.
make contact. Yeah,
I was going to
and
say
if you're
this
not
is
inclined, you might want to protect yourself.
yes.
You might want to
What
use
I
protection.
what I was going to say, I got rambling there and forgot. The one thing that I do love about Ireland is how they handle death, like a traditional death, right? It's awake, and everybody from as I understand it, I was listening, actually reading, no, I was watching this series on normalizing death and dying within the world. It sounds like such a depressing
No,
thing,
no,
but
not at all. But I mean,
it's
it's going to
not in
happen to all of
Ireland.
us, right?
Yeah,
And
but it's not
yeah,
in Ireland. Like, it's nothing's hidden from the children. Like, this one person was talking about when their father had died, and everybody in the community came, and they had a big party. They drank to the person that had passed. There were children playing, they said, right around the casket. It was very normalized. It was a time to have good memories, and to, even though nobody felt like laughing or being
right.
joyful, but because that was and they said this gentleman had said, I think he was a psychologist or a doctor, but they were starting to really try and bring that tradition back because it does happen to everybody, right? And to be able to normalize it.
Yeah, and well, and another aspect of that tradition, and I have not been to a funeral in Ireland, but I have
Hmm.
been to a couple of traditional funerals in the
Right.
U.S. for Irish people of Irish who were born in Ireland
Right.
and immigrated here. And one of the traditions is the keening, which is kind of
Oh,
remarkable.
I
And
never
I
heard
think
that.
there's other cultures that have this style of tradition. The keening is it's basically a wailing, and it
Okay.
almost sounds like a song, and
Hmm.
it's a kind of repeated mournful song that takes place at the funeral, um, sometimes at the wake, but
Hmm.
typically at the funeral itself.
Right.
And in some places, even people will come and join in the keening, whether they knew
Hmm.
the person or not, just to sort of raise that voice. And it's this very kind of
Hmm.
mournful song. And
Hmm.
I, I was at a funeral, and this woman started doing it,
Hmm.
and before you know it, everyone was just doing it with them,
Mm.
and it was very, very powerful because it's great to share memories, and
Hmm.
it's great to celebrate, of course, but at the end of the night, when you turn the lights off and you put the sandwiches away, that person's not there anymore, and you're
Hmm.
sad. You're
Yeah.
really sad, and you really miss them, and so it's a very ritualistic release.
Hmm.
And interestingly, many people equate the banshee's
Oh,
cry.
I was just thinking that.
No, you were, yeah.
Oh, I kept hearing you as Banshee. Banshee.
Yeah,
I don't know why this always happens when we do a show. I swear to God, to you, that's what I was thinking.
that is amazing. Yeah, so the banshee's cry is
Mhm.
certainly thought to be not unlike the keening. It's this very mournful, sorrowful cry. Usually, keening, traditionally women would do the keening, and the banshee is pretty much always a female figure,
Mhm.
and you hear this mournful cry, or this kind of, they call it a scream, but it's something that, because you recognize that as a death wail, basically, is what it is.
But you
um
don't want to hear it, do you,
but
from
you
the
don't want to
Banshee?
hear it,
Mm-mm.
because, yeah, because if you hear the banshee, unfortunately, it means that it's usually someone that it's not you.
It's someone
you're
you
not
love.
you're not necessarily hearing the, like, it's not necessarily foretelling of your death. It's usually someone that you love, which makes it, like, much
More
more
torturous.
intimidating, yeah,
And
and torturous,
torturous.
yeah.
Hmm.
Definitely, yeah. And then
Hmm.
you don't know exactly who it's going to be, but it's usually the person who's kind of,
Hmm.
sickly, so.
My favorite show, and they don't have it on anymore. I don't watch very much TV, but I loved Supernatural. And when some of the stuff got a little crazy throughout the seasons about like angels were really bad and they were best friends with the demons, but they weren't demons or anything like that, right? But right in the beginning, when that's what I liked about it was they would go on, they were hunters, right? Did you ever watch that show?
I didn't. Mm-mm.
Okay. Oh, nice eye candy to look at too. But anyways, they would go, their mother was a hunter, and they were aware of all these things you write about, all these things you talk about, they exist. And they would go on a hunt. Like they would scan
Oh,
all around North America, the newspapers, whatever they could to see any strange occurrences. And then they'd go to it and they'd have to rid it of it. They called
ooh.
it the family business, hunting things and saving people. So what I started to look at was, who the heck is writing this and where are they getting all this information? And I started to realize a lot of the stuff that they covered, there is actual lore or information on these things that
Yeah,
they actually went, yeah, it was
so
amazing.
interesting, yeah. Wow.
Hmm.
Well,
No, it
now,
was, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, now I have something to binge watch. I've just never
Well,
watched
no, you
it.
know what? I started watching and I wish I hadn't, but I had to find out what this was all about, the Squid Game. Have you heard
Oh, I
about the
haven't.
Squid Game?
Yes, yes, and I haven't done it yet.
Oh,
I haven't
it
done it yet.
gore doesn't bother me, but it's it's addicting. I think I stopped at episode 7, I guess. And it's all in Korean, so you have to read the subtitles, so you have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
watch.
So you actually have to pay attention. I know because so many
Yep.
times we just have things on in the background, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, I
totally.
don't usually. Oh, Supernatural did get crazy, Joshua said. Yeah, and Joshua, I don't think I've met you before. Welcome. I want to give a shout out. We also had Julia here. We've got Michelle Millions. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here. Um, I was going to say, I know Dell's mom is very religious, and he was actually baptized 3 times. I know he's mentioned that to you before on one of the shows.
Poor guy.
So I was raised Roman Catholic. I don't identify with any religion, neither does Dell. We have a belief in, higher power or what have you. We do. We believe in God and, no judgment on whatever anybody else believes in. But it was just so strange when they were, I mean, I'm called the angel rock, right? I work with some of the archangelic realm crystals, and I love rock music, right? I got my crystal in my shirt here. And then you're seeing on this show that the angels are really awful. They're
Oh.
terrible. They're just awful, awful people, not people, beings. And they're hanging around with the king of hell. Like, that's where it got really crazy.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yes. So, but very entertaining, very addicting. They kind of lost their way though. In the beginning, what it was, they have an Impala. It's the most beautiful. I think it's a '67 Impala black, and they call it Baby. And they play old rock tunes.
Oh,
And as they're
fun.
traveling, like I said, when I first watched this, I remember Dell introduced me to it. I went, "How have I not known this was
How
on?"
have I not ever watched this? That's probably gonna be my reaction. Yeah. How have I never watched this? What's wrong
Yes.
with me?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, it was crazy. So I think Inner Peace Healing, if I'm not mistaken, is Shady D. She's hopping around tonight. She says, after Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I couldn't get interested in Supernatural. Well, now they've got Sabrina. Have you seen that show? Because that's got a lot of stuff in it. Is there any truth to that you know of?
I
Or
haven't seen because there's like a newer version of
oh,
it,
it's
right? Like,
dark.
yeah,
It's
I
dark. Yeah.
haven't watched that.
Hmm.
Um, but I kind of have heard about it just from
Hmm.
some, friends of mine. I mean, people that I know that are diehard witches love it.
They
So,
do. Okay, so then it's
yeah.
got to have some kind of something they would resonate with. Like her real
Yeah.
true father, I think, is the king of hell. And I don't really watch it. Like I'm doing resin in the dining room and I can kind of hear a
Yeah.
little bit and see. And
Yeah.
then
I
get,
just yeah, lately I haven't had I'm like the yeah, just I just haven't had the time to sit and watch things.
hmm
If I do have anything on, it's kind of in the background. But when you're writing, it's very hard for me to have. I mean, I can see if you're doing something like hands-on and creative, but
but
when
not
when
writing.
I
No,
can't
it's,
even listen to
yeah.
music when I write. Actually, I don't even
hmm
like to have music on. I just yeah, nothing,
It
no
would be
classical,
so
nothing.
distracting
Yeah,
because
it's
you get into
distracting.
your own brain. Like I have 3 books I'm writing and I need to find, I say probably you two need 48 hours in a 24-hour day. And I have the outlines, but to sit down and just start writing because once you're on a
Yeah.
roll, right? You're not going to stop because you're on a roll, right?
Yeah, well, one thing I just did just on the writing front because I've been trying to, just kind of be more dedicated about how often I'm doing it and
Hmm.
so I go on really long walks. Sometimes I take my dog with me. Sometimes I
Hmm.
just, go on my own. And a lot of times I'll listen to audiobooks or
Hmm.
podcasts or
Yeah.
something like that.
Hmm.
And I find that particularly nice when I walk and there's people
Hmm.
around because
Right.
then it's like, I mean, no offense, but then I don't
Hmm.
really have to talk to you and I can just kind of like cruise
Yeah.
on and just like, get through kind of the less attractive parts of the walk. Like,
Enjoy your walk
yeah, and you're
and
just kind
not
of like
have to.
spacing
Mhm.
out and you get all this exercise and you're not really
And
thinking about it.
you're grounding because you know what? You're connecting with nature and you're walking, right? When you got to stop
Yeah,
and
you're getting fresh
interact.
air. It's
Mhm.
it's it's good. But what I love about this time of year because it starts getting cold.
Yes.
It's cold and windy. And so
Hmm.
then when you go out or like you can time it so your
Hmm.
walks are right when like football's on. That's what
Hmm.
I do. I time it so I can walk when feel like it's like an afternoon football game
Hmm.
because nobody's out.
Right.
So I actually I'll leave my headphones in to kind of get through the like kind of, there's, just a couple busy streets and stuff
Yeah.
nearby where I live. I just want to like get through.
Mhm.
But there's a beautiful lake, also very short
Oh.
drive from my house, and it's just completely gorgeous. And there's a nice path there. And when it's cold and
Mhm.
there's football on, there's no one out.
Oh, that's nice.
And so what I've started doing is actually just taking that time, and instead of listening to something, just
Mhm.
thinking about like the plot line or the story that I'm working on, and
Mhm.
kind of how I'm going to do that, and just actually giving myself, because it's so quiet out, there's not the distractions of other people's
Mhm.
conversations. You just got a few like errant geese that
Mhm.
haven't quite left yet, and things like
Yep.
that. And so it can be very, very wind, it can be very
Mhm.
energizing and
Yep.
creatively so. So that's,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I actually, even though it gets incredibly cold here, I do like being able to go out when no one else is out. And so on those really cold days when it's
Yep.
like, yeah, if you just bundle up, there's nobody else out, and the only
I
other people
know.
you pass are just like thinking the same
I
thing as
hate
you.
going out when it's -50. I hate it. I hate it. I hate
Okay,
it.
yeah, so we have
Mhm.
our, below 0 is definitely, yeah,
Mhm.
kinda, it's
Mhm.
pretty cold here. 10, we're
Mhm.
we're we're just getting into that. It's just starting to dip down in the
Well,
30s
you're
here.
lower than we are. We're
Yeah,
for
yeah,
anybody regulars here know I've mentioned many times, I'm about 35, 40 minutes away from the Minnesota border. So I'm
right,
about 6
right.
hours north of Minneapolis, but we in January, I think last year and the year before, we were very lucky we didn't have it, but we have had winters with the wind chill. It's been like -50, -52,
So
and you
gnarly.
and it's like a couple weeks of it, and
Yeah.
nobody is out, but your skin can freeze on contact, and then we
Yeah,
go as
there's
high as
that's not safe. Yeah.
summertime, 110, 115 degrees. It's like crazy, the temperature, fluctuations around here. So,
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it's probably like, yeah, it makes 3 degrees seem balmy down here,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
That's
definitely.
I notice Joshua is the opposite of me when I write. I need
Yeah,
classical music on, or I won't be able to write, which I can see. It classical can have kind of that white noise
mhm,
kind of element too, or it kind of relaxes you, and kind of
mhm,
you can tune out other things
yeah,
that might be distracting you. But it's so hard because I used to write on a typewriter or in my
yeah,
journal all the time,
yeah.
and it's so hard to be on your computer and write and not get
Do something
distracted,
else. Yeah,
especially
yeah.
when you're like, "Oh, I need a thesaurus. Oh, I just need to look up a fact," And so I've actually, it's interesting because my
Mhm,
son has been working on some like longer papers. He's
mhm,
like getting a bit older, he's starting to work on
yeah,
longer papers. And I totally have, I've said to him, I was like, "Look, let me give you a tip here, okay?
yeah.
If you are not sure of like a year, or you're not sure of the exact name or the exact spelling, don't stop writing. Just take your highlighter and highlight that thing. And that
Good
tells you
idea.
you need to go back and fact check it and fix it up. But you can keep going with your train of thought, because I do
Mhm,
that all the time. I'll just say, like, just make something up that I think is right, but I'll highlight it because I don't know what year that actually was. And then I'll go
okay.
back and look it up. And that works well for me, because there's
That's a
kind of,
good point because I would
yeah,
never have thought of that, but that's a really good point because you're in that vibe or that mode,
right,
right?
right.
And if
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
ever written, even like if I'm doing automatic writing, for example, and channeling spirit while I'm writing, and the same thing if it happens when I'm doing a reading, I'll start talking faster, 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 faster. And if somebody interrupted me, it's
You
it's
just
like
lose it
cuts.
all.
It's like somebody cuts it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, there's kind of there's those two stages of like writing in the writer's mind, and they're both writing. They're
Right.
just, one's a little bit more editorial, and you might be going through and rewording things or looking up things, but the other is that kind of more generative thing where you're
Mhm.
just like, okay, I just need to get this down, whether it's accurate or exactly how I want it. You have to remind yourself you're
Mhm.
going to edit it no matter what. So
Yeah.
you might as well just like kind of try and get it out there.
I
But
hear
yeah,
you.
it's definitely two different sides of it's not two different sides of the brain, but
Yeah.
it's two different parts of the process. And I actually joined a writing group last year, which
Did
was really
you?
fun because it's really interesting to me to hear how other because writers are like very happy in a cabin in the woods talking to no one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important to talk with other people, just as artists kind of need to
Mm-hmm.
be around art. It's important
Mm-hmm.
to kind of talk to people about their process and kind of get to know how other people approach things. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean you're going to do it that way, but it's just sort of inspiring to know that there's somebody else out there slumped over their computer struggling too.
Writers of the Future, we have them. They do a show on here. That's where Joe, before we started, I said one of our shows was nominated for their People's Choice Awards, Science and Beyond. They have a free writer's course. Joe told me about it.
Oh,
So he said it really helped. I've signed up for it. I just haven't had the time to do it.
I know, right?
But
So there you
they
go.
have contests like part of this award. And it's huge. It's in LA. There's like all these, everybody's dressed in, black
Cool.
tie, and it's a really big thing, but they love to award new writers.
Oh,
And I don't know, maybe I'll send it to you afterwards if you want to take a peek at it, because it's
yeah.
pretty prestigious. It apparently will launch you into
Oh, how cool.
writer's world. It's, believe it or not, L. Ron Hubbard is a part
Oh,
of it. Hmm. Hmm.
Dianetics. I remember
Well,
those
yeah, but
commercials.
from what I've seen, none of that seems to cross over. They're mostly
Hmm.
covering his writing, and I know some
Yeah,
of it
yeah.
could get
He was a
pretty.
pretty prolific writer, though. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
definitely.
So, but this is pretty prestigious. Joe was streaming, so I was watching some of it, and people that were previous winners, like, you would not believe what it did for their career and got their
Wow.
work out there to the masses. That's what you want to do. It's not why you're writing, but you want to be
Right,
able to
right.
share, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I one thought I had for you when you were talking about not having the time
Mm-hmm.
to write, something because I know that you and the way that you and I communicate,
Yeah.
it's made me think of it. Because I worked with an author this summer on his book, and he's absolutely wonderful. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that he does is, well, I'm going to write this in the pool. And I'm thinking, what do you take your laptop out there? No, my suggestion to you is not to write in the pool,
Yeah.
although that
Yeah.
sounds lovely.
Mm-hmm.
But what he would do is he dictates what he
That's
wants
what
to
I've been
say,
looking for.
and then
Mm-hmm.
he pays this there's a lot of translation ones, but he
Mm-hmm.
swears by this one. It's called Rev,
Mm-hmm.
and he said it's the most accurate. You have to pay for it. It's like I don't know how much a page or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He said it's the most accurate to what you actually say,
Mm-hmm.
because I myself have done, like, I've interviewed people and I've done that sort of record to translate, and
Right.
if you have an accent, if you
Yes.
don't enunciate every word, it just it really kind of like mushes it. But he
Mm-hmm.
swears by this, and I'm thinking, well, there you are, you're doing your thing, and you
I
probably
could
have all
dictate
kinds
it.
of
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. You could actually start generating, get it into a document, and then you could go off that, and that might actually get you kind of going on
I
your
have been
book.
looking for
Yeah,
something like that. So
I'll,
let's
I'll
talk
send you
about that
the link.
after. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
What I want to ask you that we've never talked about really is all the other beasties you've written about. Like, you've written about werewolves and vampires.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you before we start. Now, Joe swears, being in New Orleans. Yes, please show it. He
Yes.
he swears in New Orleans there's this restaurant, and I
Oops.
forget the name of it. If he's listening, he might pop in here and give it to us. There is a guy, it's been there for quite I want to say over a century, this restaurant. It's a really old restaurant, high-end restaurant. And the person that owns it, like the maitre d', there's apparently pictures of the ancestors, but they all look like him. He never seems to age. So he said part of it is they
Ooh,
wonder if he's actually a
a
vampire.
vampire.
Hmm. So let's talk
Interesting.
about that. Yeah, let's talk
Yeah.
about your
Well,
interest.
so one of my actually a good friend of mine is this man named Father Sebastian, and
Hmm.
he's a very very well known vampire. He produces all kinds of vampire balls. He's a fang smith. He's an
I know somebody
author.
like that too that goes
Yeah.
to
Oh, they
vampire
probably know
balls.
each other.
They
Yep. Yep. They
probably
probably know each
do.
other. Yeah. And they've definitely heard of him.
And call
Um,
themselves a vampire. Yes, they do.
Yep,
Mhm,
yep. And he calls
mhm,
himself a living vampire. And he actually, I've also worked with him on one of his books, and
mhm,
he really has. Actually, I've worked with him on several of his books, and he really has a very magical approach to it. Which, when I first met him, I guess 15 years ago or so, I understood the sort of romantic and glamorous part
mhm,
of the vampire community, but I didn't really fully understand the more spiritual side of it.
mhm,
Not that everybody
mhm,
is necessarily a spiritual vampire, but he looks at those things as not separate. And so his spiritual practice actually brings into play glamour and chivalry and what you eat and
mhm,
what you drink and how you dress and the way that the rituals are approached, which I find very
mhm,
interesting. He has certain holidays. They are they kind of coincide with the same, the witch's wheel of the
mhm,
year. They're called different things. They have a specific kind of um, mass for funerals.
mhm.
They have a really interesting marriage arrangement, actually. You
Oh, I've never
marry,
asked about that.
yeah, it's very interesting. But he was actually just talking about he said he got engaged, and I was like, what? I didn't know that. Tell me more.
Mhm.
And he said, and I'm probably going to get it a little bit wrong, but I believe the way it goes is you hand fast, right? Which, if
Okay, got
anybody
that.
doesn't
Yeah.
know what
Mhm.
hand fasting is, that's sort of like the pagan version of marriage. And you
Yep.
usually do a ceremony, a binding by a priestess,
Mhm.
but it's not necessarily binding by law, right?
Okay.
So you do a hand fasting, and you hand fast for a year. And
Interesting.
then at the end of that year, if you decide that you want to continue, you can recommit, or you can go your separate ways. And it's
Interesting.
like very amicable.
Mhm,
So, but you commit to each other for this year. And
mhm.
then after that, you commit for 7 years. And
Okay.
if after the 7 years you want to go your separate ways, you do. And at none of these points are you actually legally married. I mean, you could be, but
Mhm,
you usually would not. And then
mhm,
at the end of the 7 years, if you're still just like, yes,
mhm.
then usually there's a legal ceremony and it's a life commitment. And there's a third marriage ceremony within the community, which is
Interest
such an interesting way to do it.
I
It's
think
like you
it's
got a
good
year, you
though.
got 7 years, and then if you're like, I mean, it gives you a lot of time to really be sure.
Yeah, but think about it, okay? Like at first I was thinking, why the numbers? You'll either hear couples that get married, their first year was one of the hardest years they've ever been through being married, or
The
one of the
best.
most blissful.
Yeah.
Now, 7 years, right? I'm thinking, why seven? But think about people that get married, they've been together for a long time. You kind of fall into this pattern. You hear the
Mhm,
seven
mhm.
year itch or the seven
Yeah.
year rut, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then think about all the divorce that you would avoid.
I know. Wouldn't it be nice if
Mhm.
you could just separate without it being a
Mhm.
dramatic ordeal, and you go
Mhm.
into it, I mean, it's kinda like a prenup, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
going into it saying, okay, we know we'll discuss this at the end of the 7 years.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure you discussed it before, but in any case, so he's one of the people that has sort of enlightened me. Yeah, and if there are kids involved, actually, the kids are usually aware of what's going on. So I think that with I think that they are involved in that process, and they understand that there's the 1 year, the 7 year, and then the life
It's
commitment.
normality for them. Right.
Yeah, just
Right.
as it would be if you were, taking them to church or whatever. It would
Mhm.
be that is actually part of the one of the tenets of the community. It's not to bring your child to these things, but to allow your child to understand that there are aspects of the community that matter to you, but that they will be making their own choices when they're old
Mhm.
enough to do so. So,
Mhm.
just like,
I think
most
that's
people.
respectful to raise
Yeah.
anybody that way in the way of a child.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yep.
But he really enlightened me to a lot of the kind of I think with him, I began to understand that the magic of the vampire is also the sort of glamour of the vampire. And that is a very interesting word. Glamour is a very interesting word because that used to be the word for witchery,
And
glamour or
really, I did not
glamoury.
know that.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
And I've even seen it written in old songs as grammary, as in
Okay.
grammar, but not, it doesn't have anything to do with grammar. It's just a variation on the word glamour. And that would be that you would go and learn the magical arts and you would learn the
Oh.
art of glamour. In other words, like being able to alter people's perceptions and
Mhm.
to invoke an atmosphere
Mhm.
that is conducive to what your end goal is and conducive to conducting magic. That's kind of what it is. So we think
Okay.
today of glamour as,
Dressing up
dressing up in
and yes,
furs
and
and yeah,
yeah.
kind of
Hmm.
walking down the red carpet.
That's the
But that's it's
the mortal human being's way, I guess.
right. Well, but even if the Muggle way, but even if you
Muggle. There
think
we go.
about it,
Muggle. Muggle. Hmm.
you do still have, there's a certain enchantment there, right? There's an
Hmm.
element of enchantment that, some people are more obsessed than others with celebrity culture, but there's an element of
Hmm.
enchantment of like, wow. And maybe it's all smoke and mirrors, right? Maybe it's
Hmm.
just like, oh, I didn't eat for a week and I got Botox on my cheeks and now I look great on the carpet.
Hmm.
That's kind of a form of trickery, right? So
Hmm.
there's a little element of that in there. But I do think like with the book that I wrote is banshees, werewolves, vampires, and other creatures of the night. I didn't know that I'd be writing another one that was about even more creatures of the night at the
Uh,
time, so kind of wanted to make sure I fit them
mm,
all in there. But banshees, we kind of discussed, right? The banshees are these harbingers of death.
death.
They sort of straddle the world of ghosts and fairies because
Hmm.
it actually does translate as of the fairy mound. Banshee means of the fairy mound.
Interesting.
So they're kind of like an in between because they're seen as sort of ghostly, but they also are definitely perceived as something of the good folk. Um, and then werewolves, we have this very kind of, I think our modern view of werewolves it's like we feel sorry for them, right? We're
Hmm.
like, oh, poor werewolf.
Hmm.
It doesn't really want to transform. It doesn't really want to hurt anyone. It
Hmm.
just kind of, it's kind of an outcast and there's this curse upon it. Whereas
Hmm.
the vampire, we feel that the vampire has made that choice more willingly. Somehow we perceive that the vampire is the one in charge and
Right.
that they may present us with that choice. And so I think it's very interesting, especially because we are basing so much of it on modern pop culture. And by
Right.
modern pop culture, I don't just mean like modern movies, but there's also literature and kind of the more modern lexicon that we think of with like Dracula and
Right.
the Anne Rice books and things like that, or like werewolves. I mean,
Hmm.
who doesn't think of American
Where
Werewolf
does
in London?
dog I know, but where does the dog man come into all this? Because is it a tulpa that the more people are thinking about this, believing in it, so we're seeing more of a manifestation of it, or
Uh,
is it a werewolf? What is it? I
I
understand it's supposed to
I
be
personally
multidimensional.
think that dogmen are werewolves.
You
That's
do?
I think they're in the same kind of family. Um, Dave Scott does not agree with me,
Okay.
so we've had discussions about that because I mean, I don't know that, right? We're talking about like I cannot be definitive about anything in the paranormal or supernatural world, right? Because we know that this is as soon as you declare
It
something,
bites you
you're
in
going to
the
be proven
ass.
wrong. Yeah,
It bites you in
exactly,
the ass.
exactly. And it's just it slips through. It's that mist, right? The
Hmm.
mist is always
Yep.
there. The
Hmm.
cloaking
Yep.
mist.
Yes,
So we don't.
always.
We've got to stay humble. Got to stay
Yes.
humble.
Yes.
And so I do think that Dogman probably has connections to werewolves, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of, but werewolves are not the only dog-like creature
I
in,
know.
right? So there's
In
like guardian
history,
dogs in history. There's
people, a race of
Cerebus.
people.
There's the
Yeah.
three-headed dog. There's
There was a
all
race of
kinds of.
people, apparently. I don't watch all these documentaries. I wish she was up here. And this is like century, like eons ago. I think they found the remains, and there was drawings, like actual, look like people's bodies, but like the head of a dog. I'm not sure if they had a tail, but they lived in like culture, not cultured like we would, but back for the day, in civilizations together. I think they could speak. Don't quote me on that.
Mm.
I was shocked about that because I had never heard that before.
I've never heard that. But
Mm-mm.
it does bring to mind like Anubis, right? The jackal-headed
Mhm.
god
Mhm.
who looks very dog-like,
Mhm.
and who could actually have been depicting something more canine
Mhm.
than a jackal potentially,
Mhm.
right? We don't
Yeah.
actually know. There's been a lot of speculation about, and also Anubis sometimes appears with different heads.
Yeah.
Um, but the idea, so the other aspect of werewolves that we can keep in mind as far as what we have on record in sort of the written world
Right.
is that you had a time, and it would probably be like the 1800s to the early 20th century, so that 100-year period or so, where
Okay.
you had a lot of exploration. It wasn't the beginning of exploration. It wasn't colonization. There was established, the US was established, Canada was established. There were established communities, but you still had a lot of people who were practicing the old ways. You had people
Mhm.
practicing the old ways in Ireland, in Scandinavia, in Finland, in Russia. And so you had this, in particular, like with the Church of England,
Mhm.
you had all of these people who were traveling around to convert, but also to record, right? To kind of
Mhm.
like, and while I realize that the conversion, it has its own, it's got its own problems. Frequently, they were men, right?
Mhm.
They were men of a certain age and class and education, very often men of the cloth. So they had a
Right.
specific doctrine, and they did have an agenda. And so everything you read from that time, you have to have like that kind of, you kind of remember where that perspective is coming from.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, it is some of the only written accounts of some ceremonies and things that took place. You just have to be able to sort of read between the lines.
Right.
And in particular with werewolves, there was one guy who traveled all around, and he traveled through all of Scandinavia. He traveled north up into Finland and into Norway, all the way up to the Arctic Circle. And he was a reverend. He was totally like in it to, convert.
Mhm.
But he also was fascinated by these other cultures. So you did have, some open mindedness toward other
Mhm.
ways. But what would happen is these people would witness these ceremonies, and
Mhm.
you see this like crazy in indigenous America. The way that
Mhm.
indigenous people were portrayed in early literature is
Yes.
absolutely
Horrendous.
outrageously horrendous. It's
Mhm.
horrendous. And I'm not going to say the words that were
Mhm.
bantered about, but you have the same thing in Europe, for example. And so this guy goes up and he's watching this ceremony. He's sent to this, let's say you're sent to this place because they're heathens and you got to convert them. So you go there and you witness this ceremony, and it's probably a fertility ceremony or a
Mhm.
ceremony to like seal the crops or whatever. They don skins,
Mhm.
bear skins, wolf skins. I mean, to catch a wolf and have a wolf skin, I mean, that's a sacred thing, right?
Mhm.
So you've got people, dancing and entering into ritual, and then you got this reverend over here like recording things. And so it's going to be equated with
His
um
perception.
yeah, so there's
Mhm.
always, but nonetheless, this guy, his name was Sabine Baring Gould. He
Mhm.
actually recorded some of the most remarkable, I think it's probably the most remarkable work on werewolves in written literature,
Interesting.
because he wasn't traveling around like the Grimm brothers were traveling around and collecting stories and turning them into these, like, they were fairy tales, right?
I didn't know they were collecting stories, and that's how they came up with their stories. So just now.
Oh yeah. Okay. So the
Hmm.
Grimm brothers, so they traveled around, in particular, like Europe, Germany, kind of Eastern Europe, and they
Hmm.
collected the most popular folk tales of the time, the things that people were
Okay.
telling around the hearth, the two brothers. And then they recorded these and kind of, rewrote them so they were in a cohesive voice, and they published them as Grimm's fairy tales.
Hmm.
Hans Christian Andersen was from
Hmm.
Denmark, I believe, and he was doing the same thing. And one of those legends was the Little Mermaid.
Yes.
And so these were tales that were, tales as old as time, right? But they were
Hmm.
retold into the author's voice. And
Hmm.
at the same time, you had William Butler Yeats was in Ireland, not exactly
Okay.
the same years, but kind of like
Yeah.
during that time there was a Celtic revival movement, which was a movement to sort of re-elevate Celtic culture, and this was during the like 1800s. And so you
Okay.
had people like William Butler Yeats, who born and raised in Ireland and was traveling around gathering the fairy and folk tales. What is a changeling? What is a puka?
Hmm.
And so they're his are pretty remarkable, and they don't have quite as much bias in them as like someone like the Reverend Sabine Baring Gould.
Hmm.
But there's actually quite a few. There's a another one. This guy who was a reverend and a consulate general, and he went and lived in Wales, and he wrote this book called British Goblins, and it's all about Welsh
Ooh.
folklore, and it's incredible. It's kind of tricky to read. I've definitely included that in my books because I know how tricky it is to read, and so sometimes you just need a little like, here's an excerpt, but this is the context.
Hmm.
So in any case, this guy Sabine Baring Gould, he's traveling all around, and he wrote this volume. It's probably, I mean, it's like 500 pages,
Hmm.
and it's all about werewolves, and it's about werewolves in Scandinavia. It's about lycanthropic streams that people would drink from, and it was supposed to transform them into werewolves. And
Right.
nearby were plants that were the antidote. And you think about that logically, if you drink from a polluted stream, you're going to like kind of lose it, right? So if
Hmm.
I tell you that you're going to turn into a werewolf if you drink from that stream, you're going to avoid that stream.
Hmm.
So there's some logic in there
Or
as
upchuck
well.
pretty quick if you did take a little drink.
Yeah, something's going to happen. But in any case, there's all of these stories. One of the things he says, which you probably appreciate this, it's quite annoying actually. When I read it, I thought, am I reading this right? Because this is, of course, this is written in 1850 or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he says this thing about how all men have and this is very reverend like, but all
Hmm.
men have the capacity
Hmm.
to turn into a werewolf, because all men have the capacity to sort of go into that madness.
Hmm.
If you get really angry and you see red, that's an example. But some
Hmm.
people become killers and they cross over that line. And
Hmm.
so he argues that it's within all of us that we actually have this, humans have this thing that can turn us into beasts. Now, a little of that was metaphor from where he was coming, but then he also says, think of the pregnant woman. And that's what I was like, and this is why your book has not seen the light of light of day. But he did kind of, and actually to his credit, I
Hmm.
will say that he, I mean, you're talking about someone who really doesn't know much about human anatomy or female anatomy or
Yeah.
hormones, or really wasn't talked about much. So he is actually kind of addressing some of the hormonal changes that women go through and how that can affect moods and have mood
Hmm.
swings. And he just uses that as yet another example. He also talks about how, pregnant women will have like extreme cravings, and it might
Hmm.
be for something irrational, right? We hear of like women who that pica thing where you eat
Or
dirt or
pickles and
whatever.
ice cream,
Yeah,
or
pickles and I right. There's all like everybody has their own kind of cravings or things that you just can't stand the smell
hmm.
of or whatever. So he talks about that as like an insatiable craving, only using it as a argument that we have that capacity within our DNA already to sort of switch over, and that some of us are in more control of it than others.
Yeah, you
So,
know what? I gotta agree with that though, because part of when I'm mentoring somebody and you get into the topic of shadow work, and part of it is where you hear people say, we don't want to be like those people. Or you've got like a pet peeve. To me, as much as annoying it is and it pushes every button, that's a message for me.
yeah,
Something's being
it
held
is.
up to
Isn't
my.
that annoying though?
It is, but you know there's
Yeah,
a message in you. You need to sit in it and unpack it, or
yeah,
it will be beneficial eventually to unpack it and see what it is. But my whole point is with shadow work, we have the potential to be it all. Like exactly kind of what you were just saying, not about pregnant women, but
yeah. No,
about
but that
killers,
extreme.
like
Yeah,
to be a killer or to do really awful, horrible things. And for whatever reason, whether it's our free will, whether, we're thinking with a conscience, whatever it may be, why some do and some don't. But
right.
we have it all. We have it all. And there's times when
Yeah.
there was an example that was used. This guy was teaching this course about it. And there was a woman up speaking, and he put his hand up and he said, you're a bitch. And she said, I beg your pardon. And he started to explain. It was a business seminar, but he started to explain and talk to her. Like, can you just imagine being up on stage? Like, who are you? And leave. But what he was trying to point out to her was, has there ever been a time, she worked in a very male dominated, competitive industry. And I think it was to get her attention. And then he started to get into, you'd have to hear it explained in her words, but she was saying that he was trying to get her to realize that sometimes, yes, you are. Like you have to be, like you're in a male dominated field, right? And if a man was very forceful or whatever, he doesn't get that term, but
No,
women do,
no.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the whole thing he was trying to say, that there are times, no, God forbid we'd ever be a killer, but I mean, there are times where we may have to embrace some of those more negative traits that we may not care for. Not making us werewolves, of course, but
Well,
mhm. Mhm.
there is actually you can have lycanthropy, which is a belief.
Mhm.
It's a medical, you can get the medical diagnosis, and there are people that have been diagnosed with lycanthropy, meaning that they believe that they're werewolves.
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely. And there's also some medical conditions that cause excessive hair growth. So,
Oh, definitely. And all kinds of strange things. I'm going to, hi, Michelle. Welcome. She's from Australia. No, she says, can
hi,
an
Michelle.
attachment help push a person to go too far? I'm going to give my perspective and I'd love to hear yours, Varla. So I guess you'd have to sort of say too far. Are you talking about doing really awful negative things, like some of the things we're talking about when we're talking about werewolves? Because um, I'm going to tell you a story. I always say, as a light worker or light warrior, I don't want to work with dark things. And the more times I say I don't want to work with dark things, the more it comes my way. I actually worked with my Akashic Record mentor to find out why after this particular incident. Somebody that I was working with literally had an attachment so fierce that it was no longer them when it took it. They were levitating on the camera. I seen them hurt their child with a look and their animals. I have never looked into the eyes of evil like that before, ever. Don't ever want to see it again if I don't have to. But I knew this person, and they're one of the kindest, most loving people you'd ever know. Now, I don't know if this is a familial curse. I don't know what it is. It's one of the strangest stories, but I seem to get those kind of things. Now, again, I just mentioned with a look. And the other thing I'll tell you, and like I said, I was raised Roman Catholic. And again, I don't follow that religion anymore. But I remember that night praying for them, praying. It was about 3 hours after I'd gotten off the phone with them. And I got a message through Messenger, cut that SHIT out now. How would they know I was praying?
Yikes.
And I swear to God, I have a witness to this too that has seen what happened. So I'm not lying about it. It exists out there. So can it make you go too far? Depends how deep and dark the practice, the attachment is. That's my thoughts. What's your thoughts?
Well, now I have questions though. Like what? Because that's a really intense story.
There's a lot
And
more to the story that
yeah,
we
that's
could do a
kind of
whole
what I want.
show on it.
Okay.
We could do a whole show on it.
Were you able
To help them?
yes.
No. And I tried, and it's not my field of expertise, but I definitely connected with them with someone who could. And they had a very good point. It didn't matter that I made the connection. This person needed to make the connection and reach out and ask for the help.
Yeah.
Now, this person, I swear to God, could not say angel, could not say God, could not say Jesus. Like, I have never seen anything like this in my life. It was not brought, and it was not brought on like this was not something faked. Like, how do you look at your child with the most evil glare and they're screaming and writhing on the floor in pain? I swear to God to you, it is the craziest story. I've seen many things like this. Now, again, I don't think people need to run around worrying about attachments, because I will tell you the one thing that I do believe, whether there's a bit of a familial thing going on with this, hard to say. The other thing is we don't dabble with things that we know very little about. A little bit of knowledge is dangerous. You've actually done a show with that title,
That's true.
and I think
That's very
they
true.
invited some of this in by accident. Maybe by accident,
I
maybe not
I
so.
I think that
Hmm.
that can definitely happen. I think that when working with other worldly beings,
Hmm.
whether they're the fairies or you're
Hmm.
calling on ancestors or you're just trying to make contact
Hmm.
with something else, you really can't it can't be expressed enough that you should not enter into it ill prepared.
I love
Um,
perfect. Yes.
in
Hmm.
particular in working with the dead, you don't just like say, hey, now lighting a candle for your ancestor and
Hmm.
making an offering is with someone that you love and trust is different than starting to go into
Making
a
a deal,
session.
making
Yeah,
the deal,
making a deal.
asking for something, promising something of somebody else, not knowing well
Yep,
enough that you
yep.
never
And
break
also
that code
just
or. Mhm,
right, and also just not taking precautions,
mhm,
ritualistic precautions.
mhm.
And that can be anything from a circle of protection to making sure that you're not in a vulnerable state of mind.
This person was too.
Yeah. And if you're so in my experience, and I don't have any experience like what you saw,
Mhm,
Laura, but
mhm,
I have had a couple times where people have started kind of like their behavior changing after
mhm,
a ritual or ceremony.
mhm,
Not one that I was at,
mhm,
but at one that I knew had taken place.
mhm,
And I do think that of those particular people, and I'm not saying this is true of every
mhm,
attachment because sometimes stuff just happens,
mhm.
but they were both in vulnerable states of mind. They were not vulnerable.
I
I'm not saying
believe
they
it.
were vulnerable people. They were not mentally ill. That was
Mhm.
not. There was not a that element of vulnerability. One of
Yep.
them was in mourning,
Yep.
and so was
Mhm,
in a lot of grief. Which I mean, do a whole show about that and the
mhm.
just even the elements of the spiritualist movement and spirit photography and all of these things that were
Yes.
taking advantage of people's mourning,
Yep.
and grief. So
Mhm,
one of them was in grief, and then the other was just kind of just going, just was very scattered. And
mhm,
so I actually have a lot of young women that come to me and ask me questions about like the tarot and working, working
mhm.
with magic and things like that,
Yeah.
and which is great, yay.
Mhm,
But one of you just gotta start small, and you have to be really responsible. And again, as you said, like the deal making is really like, it's one thing
mhm,
if you're just
mhm,
kind of doing a little lighting a candle and trying to get a little love or a little luck. It's another thing if you're calling upon a specific entity, and you have to be careful also with
mhm,
like the candles even that have like the stuff on them,
mhm.
because the other thing is you should always buy your supplies from a reputable a
Yeah.
reputable dealer.
Yes.
So I buy all my I have a there's a local shop here that I go to, and then if I shop online, there's one or two places that I go. One of them
Hmm.
is Hex, which is owned by Christian Day. He's a very very
Hmm.
practiced witch.
Hmm.
Love him, friend of mine, and
Hmm.
he owns a couple stores. He owns one in Salem and one in New Orleans,
Hmm.
and he I know he has such high standards. I know any ingredient I buy from him has passed the muster
Hmm.
for him and his husband Brian, who is also has very high standards for
Hmm.
magic. So for both for me, I feel very comfortable ordering things from them. I know
Plus,
that
you
they're
know what you're doing, okay? And this is what when you asked me, could I help this person?
mm-hmm.
I would never be so arrogant to say, I can exercise this from you. That is not my
Oh
field of
no,
expertise. That would be
me
like said,
either.
but I think it's an important point to make, and I know you weren't insinuating that, is the fact that I think we need to know our limitations. If you
Mm-hmm.
have, for example, a crushed spine, you may go see your family doctor for something or a merge doctor, but they're going to refer you to a specialist. I believe
Right.
this is what we're working with. Now, does it mean that should someone desire to be able to work with that, could they not? Absolutely, but you need to work with somebody that is experienced and
Yes.
teaches you what you need to know. And even with that, there's no guarantees. They'll be honest with you, the risks and the benefits of doing it.
So I have a friend that's living in a haunted house right now.
Hmm.
She's been living in it for a number of years, and the
Yeah.
activity, I think I've even mentioned this to you guys before,
Hmm.
the activity has increased like a lot.
Hmm.
And we actually think there may be dueling entities in there now because she
Probably.
is a person that's always had a ghost with her,
Hmm.
some kind of ghost with her, and everywhere
Yeah.
she's gone. And she's never known for sure if she's got a ghost or if she just always attracts or sees ghosts. So she's kind of a magnet, but there's some dueling entities and stuff going on there. And she asked me for help, and I said, we've got to find you someone local, someone who can responsibly work with you. I am too emotionally invested with her as a
Hmm.
friend. And I
Hmm.
also didn't feel good about her trying to do anything because
Hmm.
actually she went and she saged and lit some candles and the activity increased. So she's kind of,
Hmm.
I mean, she's kind of made like some peace with it, but she
Hmm.
sent me photos. There's objects have moved, lights are constantly flickering. There's definitely some kind of shadow beastie thing in there.
We had one.
um
We had one. We had four main
so
entities.
and sometimes, I mean, it's just like
Hmm.
you do need to know your limitations, and you also need
Hmm.
to be able to reach out for that help outside of, like, I am
Hmm.
not someone who banishes,
Hmm.
strange spirits. That's just not, that's not my jam. That's not what I
Yeah.
do. I don't
Yeah.
have any experience in it.
And that's okay.
And I might be able to do something like that in my own home,
Hmm.
and I have done things like that in my own like space, but for somebody else and
You're
at
not going to
this
take that
level, there's
level.
just, you need to get, I know for a fact there are, dozens of people who are far more
Oh yeah.
qualified, and also sometimes you need to enter into it not knowing anything about the person, because I mean,
The
sure,
best
this
way.
is a psychic, but like,
Hmm.
if you ever have like a friend or like, a relative ask you to read their cards or something, and you're just like, oh, I just know so many personal things about you, it's kind of hard to
I'm
be.
working with two other very gifted intuitives. They asked me to join them to see what we would get from spirit, just to sort of see what's going on in the world, any information, what have you. The one person, apparently, I'm the receptor. I don't
Mm.
know, I may give a little bit of insight. The other one is a very gifted medium. Got lots of names, you know what the names were. You look them up and you find out it's all connected. The other lady gets a lot of symbology and stuff from
Mm.
nature. So it's interesting. It's a threesome, right?
Oh,
As
I
I'm
like that.
getting
Yeah. Yeah.
goosebumps.
Get the triple
But
goddess action.
yes, but the thing is I think you need to as I say with this world, the more I learn about it, the more smaller than a one-celled organism I feel, because real life is like reading a picture book for a baby sometimes, I think, compared to this other world, because like you
Yeah,
even said yourself.
that's a good way of looking. Yes, yes. It's like reading a beginning board book.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
actually, there's an entire library
Oh
that
God,
we
that
can't
goes
read
on
yet. Yeah.
forever, and then the minute you think you know it all, like we were finishing each other's sentence, and it's true, because it keeps you humble. Because when you think you know it all, something will happen and knock you off on your butt there. Like,
Definitely,
mhm,
definitely. And I know that like when I first started like getting more serious about having my own magical practice or anything like
mhm.
that. And again, I think, I was raised by a
I didn't
witch.
want to
I
say
was,
that I knew you
yeah, no, no, no,
were
it's
like,
fine. Yeah, I,
mhm,
I was raised by a witch. I was
mhm,
exposed to astrology and
mhm,
tarot and the psychic arts and Ouija boards and everything since I was really little. I mean,
mhm.
very, very young. The icon of a witch was always around me since
Yeah,
I probably had one over my crib.
yeah,
So very comfortable with
yeah.
that. But when I was a teenager and I started exploring, more of like making, finding these elements for myself and reading books and reading what other people
Mhm,
did, I felt like, oh, I just want to be able to do everything. And it's kind of dangerous because there are a lot of books out there that here is a great big book of spells and it's got a spell for this and a spell for that.
mhm,
And the older I've gotten and the longer I've
mhm,
practiced, the more
mhm,
simplified I've become. And the less
mhm.
that I try and do, and the more focused I am with whatever it is that I do, just to make it a little more effective. Because it can be draining, actually. It can be
Mhm.
one time I made the mistake of reading cards at a party. And
Oh.
I was so exhausted by like 9 o'clock. I just
Mhm.
thought, how can anybody do this like, on the clock? This is
'Cause there's
exhausting
things you do to
to
separate your
build
energy.
yourself up.
Actually, Dr. Chuck Kennedy, I was just thinking I gotta get a hold of him, talk to him in a while. He actually proved where the, psychic ability comes in the brain, and he calls it the region of psi. It's located in the brain right behind the
Mm,
left ear. Because I had always thought third eye, um, pineal or pineal gland.
right,
So,
right.
and we had some great conversation. This was when I first started this on this state network, and somebody had asked, "Can you tell somebody's using their imagination versus this area of the brain that you?" And he scanned over 700 people, like that are claimed to be intuitives, and what he's using, and he's got a great sense of humor. I remember when I was talking to him about this, and he said, "Well, Lorilei, you didn't send me that couple million for me to buy a CT scan." So he said, "What do they do in the old days when they wanted to scan the brain?" He has an EEG. So,
Oh,
yes,
cool.
so that's how he's been able to see where the brain lights up and what have you. But
Oh, how cool.
he's also, and I've noticed this too, that a lot of people that are intuitive, it seems to be a lot of women, a lot of them seem to have autoimmune issues going along with it. And
Hmm.
he's actually doing a study on that to see
Oh,
what came
how
first, the
cool.
chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
But he also proved that when you do readings, this will give you your answer, that the blood sugar drops, I think he said 30 points or something,
Wow.
really quite a bit after a half hour of doing a reading. So
Wow.
he tells you to keep chocolate
Yeah,
beside you or
I was
sugar.
totally mad. There's the Halloween candy bowl right
Yep,
there. Just
yep,
like
yep,
have that
yep.
on hand.
Mhm,
Oh, very interesting. Yeah,
mhm.
that's fascinating.
And that's a science thing to it for
Right.
anybody
Right.
that, and the thing I think people don't realize is a lot of our practices nowadays, even, some of that stuff originated way back to when it was pagan stuff, didn't, or the symbology that we're seeing, or, what
Yeah.
Christianity tried to take it over and kind of wipe it all out, but they didn't quite get rid of it all, did they?
Right. Well, and there's a sort of like inherited kind of understanding of the world that's in our DNA that we can kind of tap into. But
Mhm.
also, I feel like science just proves what the witches knew all along, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, or you see that all the time. There'll be an indigenous story about a region. Well,
Hmm.
we came from this particular cave that is like this is our origin story from this area, and
Hmm.
then eventually archaeologists are like, oh look, we found these 5,000-year-old bones. They're
They
it's like,
told
yeah,
ya.
why
They
don't you
told
just
ya.
save some time and listen to the
Yes,
original
of course.
people?
Now, Dave has a question for you, Varla. I don't know if you can read it or not. It says,
Do you believe the Celts made it to North America? If you do, how did they get here and where were they based? So I actually just read an article, and you might have seen it recently, but they were able to determine that there were Vikings in North America in 1100,
Mhm.
the year 1100. I think it was
Okay.
the year 1100. And the way that they were able to tell that is because they found like tree rings, and there was a solar flare at a specific time, and it affected this tree.
Mhm.
It affected the growth of this tree. They could tell. And so they knew that this tree ring that had been found, they were able to like carbon date it, figure out what year that was, and determine, because they had found some uh, coins or some kind of metal or something like that. So anyway, they were able to date it and figure out that Vikings had actually come to North America way earlier than we originally thought, like way earlier.
Mhm.
So I do think it's entirely possible that, and especially because the Celtic and the Celtic culture and the Viking culture did intersect quite a bit,
Mhm.
and you over many years you see elements of both of those cultures within the British Isles and Ireland.
Okay.
Ireland maybe resisted a little bit longer,
Mhm.
but the Vikings, they just like hop, skip, and a jump on a nice
Mhm.
boat right down
Mhm.
from right into Scotland there, and then you just kind of like cruise over through those
Yeah.
islands. So
Yeah.
that's oversimplifying it, of course. So you do
Mhm.
know that there were Vikings. I don't know if the Celts actually made it all the way across the Atlantic.
Mhm.
I do know that I think they went to Iceland for sure.
Mhm.
So and Dave is now saying there's a lot of very strange stone chambers and megaliths in New England specifically. Yeah, so there's speculation, and the great thing is, we may everything about we know about history could change tomorrow
Mhm.
because of the advance in technology and the ability to be able to like date things. But there's also, yeah, I mean, it's possible. I don't know. I know that there's evidence that the Vikings did it, so
Mhm.
it's entirely possible. Madden MacLear has a boat actually that can go anywhere in this legend. This son of the sea god, and
Mhm.
in the legend, it's often a copper boat, and it's
Mm.
steered by mind power, and it was believed that he could go anywhere. But of course, they also thought the earth was flat, so the other
Mhm.
world really could have just been, the next continent over. I don't know. It's always kind of interesting to think about mythology and the way mythology compared to history, and what we call things. Just kind of going back to Dogman, it's like, well, someone might call that a werewolf, someone else might have called it Anubis. Are we
Mhm.
seeing the same thing, but we're drawing it differently because we have different worldviews, and we're describing it differently because we have different words, but we're
Or how
actually
many
like
people
seeing
can
the
see
same
an
thing.
accident, witness an accident, and have completely different stories, all witnessing the same thing?
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So are we and you see that sometimes. I'm in the fairy lore, you'll
Mhm.
see things that sound very much like a poltergeist, a
Mhm.
hobgoblin that's mad because you haven't been pulling your weight or leaving offerings, can pinch and
Mhm.
bruise you and scratch you and steal your things and
Mhm.
wreak some havoc. So yeah, I mean, are we describing a poltergeist? Are we describing a hobgoblin? Or was it a poltergeist all along, and the people were just calling it a hobgoblin because it fit into the folklore? It's just different words, and we have all these different languages, but there's so
Mhm.
many parallels to these kind of creatures. You see it with mermaids, vampires, the whole lot.
I never thought, I actually said this to Dell this summer, that I ever, in all the years I've known him, ever thought I would ever have a conversation about the fairies, and we did, because he's obsessed. I don't know if he mentioned on his last show, he wouldn't have said obsessed. He's Métis, so for people that may not know, that's part Indigenous or First Nations and another nationality, and it's with the little people. It's
Mm,
not the Fae, and it seems that Indigenous or First Nations, even up in Alaska, he's got a contact that he's had on his show. This seems to be more of a problem, and depending on where you live, like you don't whistle, like you can't whistle in the woods. If you whistle, like
you don't want to attract them.
But they're
But
good
that
and
actually
bad.
matches if you go back and you read some of the stories
Hmm.
about the good, they call them the good people
Right.
in Ireland. But I heard a really funny quote. This I was listening to like a travel show, and the Irish tour guide said, "You ask 100 Irish people if they believe in fairies, and they'll say no. But you
Hmm.
ask those same 100 people to go stand on a fairy mound or chop down a fairy tree, and they'll all say no way,
Hmm.
no way."
Hmm.
So there's a kind of a fear within that lore, and you see it very prevalent. And actually, if you do ever read William Butler Yeats's, it's just like Irish Tales or something like
Okay.
that. And it's a big volume of his work,
Hmm.
and it's in the public domain. I have a hard copy of it, and it's just beautiful. It's just rich with lots of things, but there's a lot of fearful stories. There's a lot of stories that involve terrifying things like corpses being carried down the road by the little people and being out after midnight and kind of being trapped by them, and then sort of enchanted and forced to do work and things like that. So there was a fear, a healthy fear, and because there was a healthy fear, there was also a certain reverence. So there's a lot of like kind of darkness to it, and there's a lot of parallels with the indigenous belief in
Hmm.
the little people, and that they are kind of like this smaller race,
One
which was
was caught on
also.
film. One was caught on film. Like I always, after we do a show, I end up sending you. Remember last
Yeah,
time it was trolls and
you always send me tons of YouTube videos. It's great.
okay, well, no, this I like this guy's show. Now, of course, Dell, even living in an extremely haunted paranormal home for 11 plus years, is still ever the skeptic. And he always says, "Oh, that could have been fake, or that could have been." It's like the guy's a skeptic that puts the videos out there. They're sent to him. He debunks them half the time, or if he changes the shading on something, he will tell you he changed the shading. He will tell you he increases the audio. And there was a couple, you could tell they were indigenous. I think it was in Alberta, up north on one of the reserves, and it's pitch black. And they turn the flashlight on. I'm not sure if it's a shed or what. And this little being pops out, and as soon as the light comes on, it goes back, and you hear them talking. Like, what was that? What was it? Well, it's gone now. Let's turn the light back on. And this thing kept popping out and going back in, popping out,
Oh,
and it was just little, but you couldn't really get a good look at it. If I remember, I think Nuke's top five went frame by frame and was able to take a still. So I think you got like about this much of the face upwards from
wow.
behind the building. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, so there's, old stories and
Mm-hmm.
there's new stories, and they're depicting these otherworldly creatures that, for whatever reason, we've gone through a denial period. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that is kind of, I mean, there's always been people who've been more open minded to it,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully part of the change that's obviously happening around the world today
Mm-hmm.
is a bit more or a lot more open-mindedness to some of those stories and the original thoughts, and an understanding that
Mm-hmm.
we are there's more than just this, this plane,
I
this.
always say, okay, if something has existed time and time again throughout generations, now again, it could be like the game telephone where you start with one word and you're in a circle and you whisper, and the last person it gets to,
Yeah.
it's completely changed. But there has to be some sort of truth to this, whether it's giants, werewolves, vampires, ghouls, goblins, fae, whatever. There has to be some truth to it because it would have died out. Because as you know, and many people that maybe study history, there was no TV or computers obviously or anything, so part of
Stay
your
entertained somehow.
yeah, but you told stories, right? Or you
Yeah.
passed down your history through story or whatever it may be. And then before TV, even people used to gather around the radio. Like what was it, like the early 40s, 1940s or late 1930s, War of the Worlds, like
Oh
when they
yeah,
at that.
everybody thought it was real and completely
Yes,
like freaked them
yes.
out. And yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I was actually just talking about the the Blair Witch Project with a friend of mine the other
Everybody
night. And
thought that was real in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, and that was kind of like the beginning of the genre of horror that was like, you know, that sort of mockumentary, like this could happen to you, paranormal activity. I noticed Dave is asking a question, and I just wanted to address that.
Okay.
Because he was asking about the boat, and so if you're talking about the Viking boat, I don't know the name of it, but if you
the one that went everywhere. The one that went everywhere. I think that's the one he's asking about that was traveled with thought.
It was Man and Mac Lear's boat. I don't know what the boat was called, but it was usually a copper boat. And it's like Manna. I have to write it. Mannanen. It's Mannan. It's pronounced Mannan. Mac Lear, and Mac Lear means son of the sea, right? It's his boat. It was like a copper boat. I don't know what the boat was called, but it was controlled by mind. Yeah, it was controlled by his mind, and he could make the winds blow, and he could use it to sail back and forth into the other world, and you could sometimes gain transport on it, and some heroes did. So I think if you can just look up, I don't know what the name of the boat was, but he
found it. One. He said he found it.
Okay, great.
He found it. Dave's coming. Everybody, Dave's coming. We're almost at the end of the show. This always goes by way too quick. I will tell you though, Dave's going to be on next Monday night.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, I've gotten to know him. He actually happened up on my show once about a month ago. He was going to be on Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano's show, and I guess he was just checking out the network, and we've kind of become friends. And I had my friend David Hansel on here. He's had a near-death experience, and he's a medium. I'm telling you, Varla, with my dog even, my dog wouldn't get along with the dog next door after she came back from camp and was snarling, growling. They were puppies, almost the same age. And I'm talking to Dave on the phone. I've been on this podcast. He goes, "Do you mind if I just kind of pop in if the dog doesn't mind?" And I said, "Sure." And first thing he says, "My, is your dog ever chatty?" And I said, "Look at her mother." He didn't know anything about the house next door. He hit it like a nail on the head and told me how to fix it. I fixed it. It was fixed in 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Okay, so next Monday we got to tune into that. Yeah.
No, but that's how Dave, I'd have Dave on here every month and a half to 2 months. He always works Mondays. So how I had him on, I had no guests that night. And he messaged me about 1:00 in the afternoon. He goes, "What time is your show on again?" And as we got talking, he goes, "Oh, that's why Spirit told me to contact you." He goes, "You know how you argue with them?" He's going, "Well, what am I going to say? Just contact her." So when I found that it was off, I'm going, "Yes, you could be on." Anyways, that's how Dave found us.
Awesome. So, that's super magic. Super magic.
Yes. So you know what? Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to have you again soon because every time we have the best conversations.
We really do. We really do. And I appreciate it. I love having, sometimes these things are more scripted. People want to have you submit questions in advance. And I just love being on your show because we just talk and it just goes from topic to topic.
It's more interesting though for people too, right? Because they're part of the show just as much as you are.
Yeah, I love questions too. I love getting the audience feedback and questions. And how much time do we have?
We have a few minutes because we started a little late.
I just wanted to say to you that I want you to look up this woman. Her name is Ida Craddock, and she was a channeler.
Okay.
She made contact with an angelic being named Soph. And she has this really incredible story. Don't have time to tell the whole story, but essentially she was
I'm looking for a pen.
She was distributing. I can message it to you too.
Good.
But her story is pretty amazing. In the mid or the early 1800s, she would write these pamphlets educating young women about what to expect on their wedding night. And this is in very Victorian, super corseted times. And there was a guy named Anthony Comstock who persecuted her. and for the distribution of lewd materials, is what they said. And in the end, he was able to arrest her because she distributed them through the U.S. mail, and that was a felony. She ended up taking her own life when she was faced with
Oh.
life in an institution.
Mhm.
But the most amazing thing about her is that she claimed to get all of her knowledge about marriage and life, and also just the other world, uh, by through contact with an angelic being named Soph, who used to come through her window on regular occasions, and to whom she had a spiritual marriage to. And
Ooh,
her
interesting.
channeling, her channeling was so revered that even Aleister Crowley, after her death, inducted her into the OTO as an honorary, I think like a fourth degree or something.
Wow.
So and just when you were talking about automatic writing, there's many, many longstanding traditions, but she's one of the most authentic. And I think you would really,
I would.
especially because of the angelic connection,
Mhm,
I think that's a
mhm.
woman for you
I
to
wrote
look
it
up.
down. My ears are perked right up. Now,
Yeah,
where can
yeah.
people find you? I will have her back on again. That's why I wrote what I wrote for her. I said you're going to love having her on here because she's just a wealth of knowledge and she's such a sweetheart too. I
So
just love
fun.
her.
So fun. You can go to varlaventura.net. That's my website.
Mhm,
I've got a few new items there for
mhm.
sale. Always kind of making like different things. I got my Varla Ventura mug,
I love
but
it.
also we've got some new witchy stuff up there. My mom
Oh,
did some
awesome.
art. It was really cool.
Cool.
And then if you go to the bottom of my website, there's a place to subscribe. I'm trying to relaunch like a regular, maybe once or twice a month, just a newsletter with fun,
Nice.
freaky stories and cool
Nice.
tidbits.
Mhm.
And then I'm also in the process of launching a sort of a midnight storytelling podcast. So,
Oh, I
yeah. So
love it.
I'm just almost ready to record a couple of those, and they'll just be little snippets of there'll be stories, not necessarily
I
fiction stories, but
love it.
magical stories to keep you up at night.
I
So,
think it's
instead
gonna
of putting
do
you to bed.
fantastic. I wanna thank you so much for being here. You
I
know how
thank
much we
you for
love
having
you.
me. Yeah, thank you.
And we'll have her again soon, folks, I promise. And as I've said, Dave Petrella will be here next week because many
Right.
people I've had on that are into the esotericism, for example, many have said exactly what I say. Astrology is not my forte. It's not. I know a bit about it, but it's not. And Dave spoke up, I'll teach you. And he's got an
Great.
interesting way of the way he looks at it and brings mathematics actually into it, he was telling me.
Oh,
And I'm
cool.
not doing it
Yes.
justice.
That's where I get caught up. I can do the houses and
Hmm.
the main stuff, but then there's a lot of math and
Hmm.
like you know
Hmm.
trines and stuff, and that's where
Hmm.
I start I that's when I need the experts.
Yeah. Well, he says he's got an easy way to teach people. So
Ooh,
I'll connect you with
fun.
them. Hmm.
Fun.
So, you
Okay.
guys, I want to send you all so much love and light. And wherever you may be, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We will be back, same place, same time. I almost forgot to tell you guys, I am putting on a UPRN Halloween party Sunday, October 31st. It'll be 9 p.m. Central or 10 p.m. Eastern till whatever time. We have programming going 24/7 if we're not live, but we're going to be live. Whatever hosts are coming will show up. What we're looking for. Have you got a ghost story? Have you got a true story? Have you got some pictures? Have you got some EVPs? Feel free to send them to us or our page, UPRN. You can look me up on social media. It's www.facebook.com/Angel Rock or just under my name, Lorilei Potvin. I'm on all social media. Please share it because we're going to dress up in costume. So if you want to, it's going to be a lot of fun. And you're invited, of course, if you want to pop into Varla, you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Hmm. So you guys take care and we will see you on Sunday. Thanks again, Varla, so
All
much.
right. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.
Bye.